To this day, just hearing the word nanny sends a chill down my spine. My childhood memories are mostly vague and fragmented, but there's one specific memory that has always stayed with me: the vacant stare and restrained smile of Margot. I was 7 years old when she appeared in my life, and to this day, I don't know exactly where she came from. My parents, at the time, were too busy to bother explaining. All I remember is waking up one day and finding her already in the kitchen, as though she'd always been a part of our home. Margot was a thin woman, with very pale skin and hair tied back in a tight bun that seemed like it would never come undone. She never laughed, never said more than necessary, but whenever our eyes met, her small smile would appear, something between a secret and a threat. At first, I couldn't quite pinpoint what unsettled me about her, but as the weeks passed, her presence began to weigh heavily. Margot had peculiar habits, quirks that I now realize were part of a carefully calculated routine. Every day at 6 o'clock in the evening, she would close all the windows in the house, one by one, and pull the curtains tight. She said it was to protect the house from what comes from outside. When I tried asking what she meant, she simply stared at me and replied in a low voice, "If we let something from outside come in, you'll never be able to leave." The way she said it, with her face so close to mine, sent chills down my spine. It was a simple sentence, but she delivered it with such certainty that it felt more like a prophecy than a warning. At night, when my parents went out and I was left alone with her, Margot wouldn't let me do anything. She would turn off all the lights in the house, leaving only a single candle lit on the living room table, and made me sit quietly beside her. It felt like some kind of vigil. I tried to stay awake, but the silence of the house, broken only by the occasional crackling of the candle, left me restless. On one of those nights, I dozed off and woke up to a strange sensation, like someone was watching me. When I opened my eyes, I saw Margot beside me, her eyes fixed on my face. "You move while you sleep, you know," she said in a voice that didn't sound like hers. "I need to teach you to stay still, or he'll notice." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, even though I had no idea who he was or what she meant. From that day on, Margot began to train me to stay still. Whenever my parents went out, she would make me sit in a chair and tell me not to move a muscle while she left the room. Sometimes she would disappear for long minutes, and I would hear footsteps upstairs, but I didn't dare leave my spot. One night, as I struggled to keep my eyes open and my body steady in the chair, I heard a sound I'd never heard before. A long, muffled whisper, seeming to come from somewhere inside the walls. At first, I thought it was the wind or old pipes, but soon I realized it was something else, almost human. I was about to get up and run to my room when Margot appeared in the doorway, staring at me with her wide, deep eyes. "Sure. You hear it, don't you?" she asked, walking toward me slowly. "He's closer tonight." I nodded, terrified, not knowing what to say. Deep down, I started to believe that Margot really did know something about the house that no one else did. She would say that if I moved, he would notice, repeating it like a rule of life. I believed her, even though I didn't understand. Over time, I noticed that Margot had other strange rituals. Once, I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and as I passed the hallway, I saw the door to my parents' bedroom slightly ajar. In the darkness, I could make out Margot standing there, motionless, facing their bed, watching them sleep. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. Fear overtook me, and I ran back to my room, trying to block out what I had just seen. After that night, things got worse. Margot started bringing objects into the house, small bottles with dark liquids and pieces of old, dirty fabric tied in knots. She would hide them in corners, like behind the curtains or under the armchairs. When I asked what they were, she looked at me sternly and said, "They're for protection. Never touch them." One night, when my parents were running late and the clock had already struck midnight, I heard footsteps upstairs. The house was completely dark, except for the candlelight Margot always left in the living room. A chill ran down my spine as I looked at her, hoping for some kind of explanation, but she just pressed a finger to her lips, motioning for me to stay silent. Suddenly, there was a loud noise, like a door slamming shut upstairs. I wanted to scream, but Margot grabbed my arm tightly and whispered in my ear, "He's here, but you're not going to let him find you, are you?" That night, I sat frozen as the footsteps echoed throughout the house. Margot, without a word, blew out the candle and left me alone in the dark, promising that if I moved or tried to escape, he would finally see me. The next day, when my parents came home, I ran to them and begged them never to leave me with Margot again. I told them about the footsteps, the rituals, and how she spoke of someone who wanted to find me. They fell silent, exchanging uneasy glances, before finally telling me that Margot had resigned and disappeared that same night. We never saw her again. Today, decades later, I still dream of those footsteps and the muffled sounds coming from the walls. Years later, I discovered that the house we lived in had been the site of tragic events long before we moved in. Somehow, I believe Margot knew that. Perhaps she wasn't just a nanny, but some kind of dark guardian, determined to keep something under control. Yet to this day, I don't know if she was protecting me, or preparing me for something much, much worse.
My name is Christine, and ever since I started college to study education, I've been taking babysitting jobs at night to make ends meet. Most of the time, it's an easy job without much excitement. The kids are usually already asleep, and I use the time to study while getting paid through the agency that hired me. But that night, everything changed in a way I'll never forget. I got the call in the morning about a job babysitting a boy named Jimmy. He was 8 years old and described as quiet and intelligent. His parents, Albert and Helen, needed me to stay with him until late because of an important event at Albert's company. I accepted without a second thought. I arrived at their house around 7 in the evening. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where you could walk without fear even after dark. The Landers' house was charming, with an exposed brick facade and a warm yellow light that spilled over the garden. In the backyard, one detail stood out, a treehouse built on the sturdiest branch of an old oak tree. It was made of light wood, with small windows and an improvised ladder leading up to the entrance. Though clearly meant for play, it looked old, with weathered planks and an air of abandonment. Helen greeted me with a warm smile. She explained that Jimmy had already eaten and usually went to bed early, around 8. Albert, impatient, called to her from the hallway, reminding her of the time. Before leaving, she gave me a worried look and said, "If you need anything, call us. We'll be late, but answer any calls." I thought her comment was a bit strange but didn't dwell on it. Jimmy was a curious boy, soft-spoken with an observant gaze. After a few games and a quick chat about his drawings, I tucked him into bed. As I adjusted the blanket over him, Jimmy made a serious request: lock all the windows and doors. I found it odd that a child his age was so concerned about safety in such a safe neighborhood. When I asked why, he replied, "Because of the man who lives in the treehouse." I smiled, assuming it was just another of his childish fantasies, and promised I would take care of it. I closed the window in his room, but before leaving, I glanced at the treehouse. The quiet backyard felt unsettling, and the structure seemed to be watching me in return. Back in the living room, I settled on the couch with my books. A comedy show played on TV while I tried to focus on studying. Then I heard it, a soft tapping at the window facing the backyard. My heart skipped a beat. I got up and looked. Nothing. Maybe a branch? Or just my tired mind playing tricks? Wind at night sometimes does that. To be sure, I turned off the TV and went back to my studies. A few minutes later, I heard another noise, clearer this time, a rustling among the leaves. Looking out the window, I saw leaves falling from a branch near the treehouse. What made my breath catch was the shadow that appeared in the small window of the treehouse, peeking out as if watching the house. My heart raced as I fumbled for my phone to turn on the flashlight. When I looked again, the shadow was gone. With adrenaline surging, I decided to check on Jimmy. I found him sitting up in bed, his wide eyes fixed on the window. He whispered in a trembling voice, "You didn't lock all the windows, did you?" A chill ran down my spine. I thought about the windows in the house, and that's when it hit me, the window in his parents' bedroom. I hurried out of the room, feeling his scared eyes follow me. When I entered the master bedroom, the window was open, the wind rustling the curtains. As I approached it, the treehouse loomed outside, still and quiet, but in the darkness of one of its windows, I saw something that froze me, the outline of a face, its eyes locked on mine. My hands trembled as I managed to close and lock the window, yanking the curtains shut. I rushed back to Jimmy's room, silently promising myself that I would call the police and his parents immediately. Jimmy shook his head, pale as a ghost. "It won't help. They think I'm imagining things. And the police, he always gets away." Before I could press him further, we heard the click of the front door opening. The sound echoed through the house in a terrifying silence. "He's inside," Jimmy whispered, and my thoughts spiraled. I began to hear slow, deliberate footsteps climbing the stairs. Gripping the bedroom doorknob, I locked it, feeling Jimmy cling to me with cold, trembling fingers. Then the doorknob started to turn, followed by a soft knock and a raspy voice. "Jimmy, I know you're in there. Let's play." The words, spoken in an almost friendly tone, made the moment even more horrifying. "I'm calling the police," I shouted, my voice shaking with fear. In response, a loud bang shook the door, followed by a chilling scream. "Come play now." And then, silence. Just the sound of my heart pounding in my chest and Jimmy trembling beside me. He looked at me and repeated, "It won't help. He'll come back. He always comes back." I summoned the courage to ask, "Who is he?" Jimmy averted his eyes. "He came after Dad built the treehouse. He said we destroyed his home, so now he lives there." The logical part of me wanted an explanation. A homeless man, maybe? Someone hiding there without Jimmy's parents knowing? I decided I needed to confront him. Grabbing a baseball bat from the closet, I told Jimmy to stay locked in the room and headed for the door. The house seemed to shrink as I descended the stairs, each step filled with a different kind of dread. I reached the base of the tree and shouted, trying to steady my voice, "I've called the police. Come out now." No response. I took a deep breath and began to climb. To this day, I don't understand why I did it, why I risked myself like that. Maybe it was Jimmy's scared look, that desperate plea in his eyes, that gave me the courage to face whoever was in the treehouse. The wooden floorboards creaked under my weight. Inside, the dim light from my phone illuminated scattered toys and an old blanket. The treehouse was empty. From its window, there was a direct view into Jimmy's bedroom. That's when I noticed something carved into the wall beside the window, the initials H.F. and the date, October 9, 1995. Then a harsh scream pierced the air, "Get out now." My body moved on its own, stumbling and falling down the ladder. Everything went black. I woke up to the fluorescent lights of the hospital. Helen and Albert were by my side, pale, with police officers surrounding them. The bright hospital lights reflected in the worried eyes of the medical staff and officers jotting down notes and questioning Jimmy's parents. I told them a simple story. I climbed the treehouse to get a toy for Jimmy and fell. Helen looked at me, relieved yet frightened. "That treehouse. Albert, we need to tear it down. It's too dangerous." Albert agreed without argument. "I'll tear it down tomorrow morning. No more accidents or stories." As I listened to their plans, I felt a mix of relief and unease. Jimmy's expression, however, was not one of relief. He stared at me with a look of fear and resignation, as if he knew that even after my fall, even after that terrible night, the figure would return. When the police asked if I had seen anyone, I hesitated. The image of the face in the treehouse window flashed in my mind, its hungry, watchful eyes. I swallowed hard and lied. No, it was empty. That night, I went home with a bandaged wrist and a restless mind. Every time I closed my eyes, the raspy voice echoed in my head, "Jimmy, I know you're there. Let's play." The next day, I returned to the Landers' house to make sure the treehouse was being demolished. Albert was already there with a sledgehammer and a few workers. I stayed at a distance, silently watching, hoping this would be enough to banish the fear that hung over Jimmy. As the workers dismantled the structure, they found something hidden among the planks, an old notebook. The initials H.F. were scribbled on the cover, along with cryptic entries. Helen turned pale as she read pages describing a nocturnal visitor who came to play and whispered about his stolen home. Months later, Helen called me to say Jimmy hadn't mentioned the man since that night. But deep down, I couldn't shake the question, who, or what, was the man in the treehouse?
I have worked as a nanny for a few years and always had good experiences, until I was called by a new family that had recently moved to town. It was a huge house, with an unkempt garden and a tall fence that seemed designed to keep everyone out. They had 2 children, Arthur, 6 years old, and Laura, 4. The father greeted me, and as we walked upstairs to the kids' room, he quietly asked me to avoid talking about the previous nannies. I found it strange, but I didn't ask any questions. The first night went smoothly, but I noticed something peculiar. When I was reading a bedtime story to the kids, they insisted that I leave the door open. I asked why, and Arthur replied, "The other nanny was with the door open." I tried to laugh it off, but a chill ran down my spine. Was he joking? On the second night, late at night while I was in the guest room, I heard a muffled noise coming from the hallway. It sounded like bare feet dragging across the floor. Thinking it was one of the kids heading to the bathroom, I went to check. But the hallway was empty. When I turned back to return to my room, I noticed that the kids' bedroom door was slightly ajar, even though I was certain I had closed it before going to bed. I decided to ignore it, but as I lay down, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that I wasn't alone. On the third night, Arthur asked me outright, "Are you going to get nervous too?" I asked what he meant, and he told me that the previous nanny always got nervous after a while. He seemed hesitant to say more, but before I could ask any further, Laura whispered, "She still lives here." That was too much for me. I spent the day mulling it over, and by night time, I was barely able to focus. After the kids went to bed, I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth. Through the mirror, I saw the door behind me slowly opening. When I turned around, there was nothing there. But the worst part was the overwhelming feeling that someone was standing in the doorway, watching me. I decided it would be my last night. As I lay down, I left the door slightly open so I could keep an eye on the hallway. At exactly 3 a.m., I heard the dragging sound again, and this time I clearly heard someone whispering. I got out of bed and walked into the hallway, but it was dark, and the sound seemed to come from everywhere. When I finally reached the kids' room, they were sitting up, staring at me as if they had been expecting me. Laura pointed to the corner of the room and whispered, as if sharing a secret, "She's there." I looked toward the corner, and I swear, for a split second, I saw something move, a shadow of a woman with long hair, just standing there, watching. I ran out of the room and straight into my own, locking the door and waiting until sunrise. The next day, I sent a message saying I wouldn't be coming back. Later, while talking to a fellow nanny, I found out I wasn't the first one to leave that house.
Hello. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with your friends. This helps us grow and bring even more new content. Thank you, and see you next time.